If you enjoy this content, please take a moment to rate and review it. Your feedback will greatly impact our ability to reach more people. Thank you. All right, Vic. Another live episode of Health Further, episode 180-something.
That's right.
I don't know that this is going to get slotted in at 184, but we're live at the Jumpstart Health Summit, and we've got our friends and family here, and we're so grateful to have Chris Boone, who is the GVP of Research Services at Oracle. Chris is coming to us from Dallas, Texas, and has had a long, storied career in the healthcare industry, predominantly in pharma, but now is working at the juggernaut that is Oracle, and I think has a lot of incredible things to share with us today. But Chris, can we start with a little bit about your background, sort of how you landed in this role that you are currently in at Oracle?
Yeah, well, just to make sure that everyone is, just to level set with everyone, I lead the life sciences business, the research services group within Oracle Health and Life Sciences. I actually came by way of Big Pharma, so I worked at AbbVie, leading a number of research functions there. And prior to that, working at Pfizer, leading a number of research efforts that we had there. Now, the research that I've done has always been a little bit different. I think when people hear research, they're either thinking lab rats or you're thinking clinical trials. And the work that we've been driving is really around real evidence. We were certainly early pioneers in that space. I think you're seeing a lot of that take off and how it's evolving, or really accelerating the evolution of how we do drug discovery and how we do clinical trials and how we do the commercialization of drugs and products and things across the industry. And that's what I've been dedicating the last 10 years of my life doing, really is around the sort of serving as an ambassador of this new approach to how we think about things, and then also just educating people on what can be done. And so I go around the world literally talking about these very things.
So can we dig in a little bit about why you maybe are not at a pharma company and are choosing to be at one of the largest tech companies? You know,
I don't know if that's any better.
I mean, but just the idea that, you know, someone who and I also want you to share your vision and your mission, because I think they're pretty compelling. But why would you move into the technology sector as opposed to working at a diehard healthcare company?
I did. I mean, and I think the part that people often miss is that while I've been in pharma, we'll just say the last decade plus, and working with pharma, I actually started in health systems. So really, my mantra is probably a little bit different than some of the others you'll see, because I started in the world of nonprofits, really with that sort of the mission being the first and primary thing that I really operate from. And that still holds, by the way. And I think that when I made the transition into pharma, it was because I wanted to look at healthcare from another side. And I thought that we could really push this idea of precision medicine much faster if I were able to share that perspective of how it looks on the outside of it. You know, it was interesting navigating, you know, I mean, as you can imagine, big pharma companies are very complex organizations that people so often forget it, because you really got a whole research discovery aspect of it, which has its own ecosystem. You have the development piece of it, and you see a lot of M&A, and I know you can appreciate this. Pharma companies, I always say, are just big finance companies that focus on drugs. And a lot of that is because they are in the acquisition business. They acquire much of these things. But anyway, so as we were driving innovation inside the pharma company, I say we because I'm always surrounded with a great team of people, you know, I sort of reached a point where we pushed it as far as we can go when you're doing internal sort of change leadership and innovation. And I know that, and when I looked at Oracle, which, by the way, I was not familiar with Oracle at all, right? Like literally before 2023. I mean, I knew Oracle, but I didn't know of it in the life sciences world. But I was invited out to the Oracle Cloud World, which is now Oracle AI World, to be one of the keynote speakers at that event with Seema Verma, my boss. And we were really talking about future innovations and what we thought the world of healthcare and life sciences could look like. And it was and actually once we walked off the stage and when she cornered me and said, I need you to join my team. And that's how I ended up joining Oracle. So it was a very informal way of joining the organization. But it was at that conference when I saw that Oracle had all the different pieces and components that I thought would actually drive the industry forward on a global scale. So for me, I've been very, very focused on making a global impact. And you asked about personal mission. I think we all sort of have bold aspirations. Mine is just a world free of disease. You know, it sounds very aspirational, but I think it needs to start with a bold aspiration.
That's powerful. I want to pick up on the idea that Oracle has this very unique set of pieces to approach healthcare, especially in this day and time where it is obviously going to have to be so tech-enabled, and really to maybe achieve your mission, it needs to be very tech-enabled. I think when Oracle made the acquisition of Cerner, that sent shockwaves throughout the industry because there really hasn't been a health tech acquisition of that scale, nor has, and the acquisition spoke louder than any press release could in terms of the seriousness that this die-hard, multi-generational at this point technology company had in terms of focusing on healthcare, right? Yeah. Like that commitment to focus. I think you could also argue that in addition to all the different pieces of technology that they have that healthcare organizations leverage, they also went and acquired people in a way that is very different from other technology companies. Yeah, people like you, people like Seema, people like David Feinberg, right? I mean, these are like legitimate healthcare people. They're not tech people who are tourists in the healthcare space. Right. Can you talk a little bit about what the vibe is like inside of a technology company that has made that kind of dedicated investment in the last 5 years, right? Into healthcare as the future. And you can also talk about, Larry Ellison's focus there as well.
Yeah, I mean, for your awareness, I mean, you probably know that, but the Cerner acquisition was $29 billion by Oracle. It was the single largest acquisition Oracle has ever made, and they've made a gazillion of them, right, over time. But I think what it did was reinforce Larry Ellison's commitment to healthcare and life sciences. In many respects, he viewed that this is his legacy, right? He would go on record and say that he thought that Oracle would be a healthcare company at some point, right? And so I think that, and in order to make this work, I think they recognized that you needed true leaders and thought leaders and policymakers and folks who have lived that life to drive that business, right? I mean, you couldn't just have a pure technologist because the industry is too regulated. There's too many nuances that I don't think that people can readily account for. But I think when Larry, his thinking was, and it's almost simplistic in a way, where he was just thinking like, when I look at my credit card, I can use it anywhere around the world. When it comes to my health data, I cannot. So to me, that was a stronger sort of interoperability play, which I think is necessary. But I think we're at a place where the world is so much bigger and there's so much more that we could do. And that's kind of what so when I say a world free of disease, what I really mean is each individual in the world has access to care, has access to therapies, has access to personalized precision medicine. That's ultimately what we want to build. And the interoperability to me is a foundational component to making that happen, right? And I think that even since he made that sort of statement of his vision publicly, we've seen so many advancements in technologies that allow us to do things that, honestly, I don't even think were in the roadmap before, right? So what you asked about the sort of energy, I think it's interesting because I'll be honest, it's hard, right? You have it's like a clashing of different cultures, right? You have the Cerner culture. It had its own thing and the way it operated. You have Oracle and its historic culture and what it operated. Then you got a bunch of new people like me coming in with a totally different perspective than any of those entities, right? And so I think Seema's been very adamant about pushing culture and pushing integration and pushing the harmonization that we need as a business to really thrive. And I think to be honest with you, I think we're really now starting to hit our stride, right? It took a couple of years or so to really sort of to mesh and to get alignment, and I think and build trust, just like any other organization, but I think we're there now.
Another question about Oracle's commitment to healthcare. We're currently gathered in Geodis Park in Nashville, Tennessee. Maybe not universally, but widely regarded as the healthcare capital of the United States. And it's interesting that Oracle chose to establish a very significant presence here. I don't know if I know the exact terminology to, what you would call it. I've heard all sorts of things. World headquarters. Yeah. I mean, that seems like a big thing.
That's a big thing.
That's a big thing. And I think that was done because of the healthcare industry here, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so talk a little bit about that.
Well,
not just
when it happened. I mean, I think that we were all shocked. We all learned real time when you learned, right?
Okay.
And it was funny, it's a Larry Ellison thing, right? I mean, sort of when he has a great idea, he's a brilliant guy. When he has a great idea, he speaks it, right? And it was one of those moments. And so the current world headquarters for Oracle is in Austin, Texas, right now, and that campus was built. And honestly, we haven't been there that long, right? And so to make that announcement to then shift it to Nashville was a rather big deal. And I think you've seen it. I mean, I know that, we were talking earlier, you said the construction seems to be progressing a little slower than we thought, but I think, I was sort of texting with some folks and they said, no, we're right on time. And I was like, okay, well, I'll make sure I convey that. But there's like some permitting and all these other things that has to take place, and that stuff takes a little bit more time. But I think ultimately, I would say we're still in that 5-year plan to having that full headquarters, which will be phased out, and it'll be a campus and all these great things. And look great right across from your stadium and all these other things.
Let's go. Let's go. All right, one more question, and then I'll pass it over to Vic. Talk about research services division that you lead. Let's talk about what it was, what it has been since you joined, and where it's going. This might be the right time to start to integrate the topic of artificial intelligence into the conversation as a transformative force in the way that our businesses operate.
Yeah, I mean, so I think what it was it was a collection of different research organizations, different research businesses, and then for the most part, it still is. But those businesses have all been disrupted, and they're evolving. And a lot of that is due to AI. So one business we have is like one line of business under research services is a clinical research organization, or a CRO, right? Which means they do trials globally, and they do things in a very sort of human-driven process, right? I mean, it's a lot of people, CRAs going to sites and doing these things. But, you've seen over the last several years a push more towards what people say decentralized trials. I consider them to be more hybrid trials. And that's been one disrupting factor. But then you also layer in the fact that there's been a concerted effort, COVID really drove this, less of a need to have so much human FaceTime, right? So we've seen that business alone sort of change, and we've been making a lot of strategic changes as part of that. Another business we have under there is the real world evidence business, which is what I described. It's focused on the secondary use of real world data to drive evidence and all these things that would support anything. I mean, whether it's clinical decision-making, regulatory decision-making, alike. We have, so I won't go through all of them, but it's like 6 different lines of business underneath, and they all do different types of research. Every single one of them have been disrupted with AI. So now it's forced us to sort of rethink. And I was chatting with someone earlier this morning. He's a guy that runs a PE firm himself. And he was like, he said, we woke up one day last week and realized that one of our portfolio companies only needs 30 to 40% of the people that it has now. And so they're struggling with trying to figure out like what to do with all those people. I think our organization, no different, right? You probably have heard Larry speak to the fact that most of the software engineers are doing the vibe coding approach now. Right, a lot of it's being so you can see the direct impact to roles and to the workforce. So when people say that it doesn't, I'm like, but it's much harder, right? And then at the lunch table, I heard the gentleman there speaking about building much more of an AI native company, right? But it's much harder to take an existing entity and retrofit it, right? So what we're trying to do is work through that change process and redefining and upskilling and reskilling and doing all the things we can to position the business for the future.
Chris, thanks for doing this. I want to turn to maybe a more optimistic outlook on AI. We do have to go through this change management.
Sure.
I get the lucky role of running our littlest companies, and so they have less of the change management challenges, but there's still some. But I really am compelled with your vision of curing all disease. You might have said it a little bit differently. And it strikes me that real-world evidence and a new approach to how we validate the effectiveness of treatments and test with diverse populations and in different geographies, the number of discoveries, AlphaFold and AI and biotech is sort of utilizing these tools very quickly, which is going to lead to incredible unlocks as far as like new treatments, new opportunities, new ways to treat these diseases.
Yep.
And at the same time, our regulatory apparatus has all of those change management issues because they're people-based and a lot of, policies, regulations. I think real-world evidence is the solution to getting broader coverage while still keeping it safe and effective. But maybe talk about, you've been very involved in public policy in general. How do you see it now, and what do we need to change to meet this moment as a country or as an industry?
I think that's a great question. But I also think it's sort of a paradox, right? Because I think in many respects, the governments around the world have been the biggest catalyst for innovation in this space. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they're one of the biggest structural barriers. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because they're not reimagining their own view and regulatory processes, right? So on one hand, I think when it comes to something such as drug discovery and development, most people assume that pharma companies operate from a place of they want to push a drug out by any means necessary. And to be honest with you, it's the complete opposite because of the liability concerns, right? So they will only do what the regulators tell them explicitly they can do, right? And so in many cases, that actually hinders innovation, right? Because, you're like, well, am I going to risk doing that if I'm going to run into issues with regulators? So they won't do it. And so they look for some signal or some green light from regulators around the world to say, we want you to do this. Now, collectively around the world, oddly, most regulators said, we want more real world evidence. We want less clinical trials because they are looking at it from the perspective of what you just described. We want to be able to have representation of all the different populations to understand how drugs impact all of them. Right. And we specifically want to know how it affects our people. There was a point in time when, most drug companies would only run trials really in the big markets. And it was like the US and the UK, and everyone sort of took their cues from them.
Right.
So if they approved it, then they would approve it. Right.
Yeah.
Well, that world's different now. And so even you got the smallest of markets, Korea would be like, well, we want you to run a trial in our country so we can see the impact on our people because there are genetic differences and, you go on.
Right.
I do think the governments around the world, the U.S. government specifically, or the FDA, has played a very vital or instrumental role in the acceleration of innovation that we're seeing in this space. I think tech companies have, outside of Oracle, have made valiant attempts, but they lack the industry and domain depth to really make an impact because they think it's a software problem.
Yeah.
And the reality, what you're solving for is bigger than just the technology. I mean, it's cultural. It's, we've been operating in a rather paternalistic industry for quite some time. And, when it comes to innovation, we're not necessarily relative to other industries, the pioneers when it comes to trying out technologies. But even in spite of that, to your point, you can point out AlphaFold, you can point out all these different initiatives that have been the Human Genome Project. These different things have been vital to where we are right now. And I think that my personal perspective is right now we're building what I like to say is a digital foundation. You're hearing a lot about, compute power and things like that and some of the AI models. I think that's all foundational things. I think what we'll quickly move to is much more autonomous agents driving a lot of these workflows that we're doing. Right now, it's sort of a human AI collaborative model, right?
Right.
And that's all part of the digital research. I do think that much of that work will be shifted to agents as we get into much more of an autonomous workflow, and then the roles of humans and people as we know it will be redefined. I think then we'll probably shift more to probably much more predictive, truly predictive, where we're predicting health trends a decade from today, and we can see what will be on the horizon, such as like a COVID type of situation. And plan accordingly. And then we'll move into probably some form of cognitive research where it's much more simulation. So imagine a world where we don't do trials because everybody is their own walking clinical trial. But more importantly, we're actually able to, rather than doing a trial and going through that whole issue, the ethical issues of giving people placebos versus giving others, that whole thing, we would actually do it. It will be all in silico.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what we want to get to is a space of super intelligence, which I think is probably 10 years out.
Yeah, so I totally agree with the foundations being laid today to enable 2 years, 3 years from now, much more impact. You really have studied this real world evidence as a way to validate the effectiveness of drugs for longer than anyone in this room, certainly, maybe longer than many people in the world. Yeah. How strong is the data science now? How strong is the data science? Like, do we need to invent new ways to vet these drugs, or is it already pretty good and we just need to scale it? Or maybe
new ways.
We need new ways.
Well, I think we've always known that, first of all, many of these sort of analyses were done, they were retrospective. And I remember I just said, we want to move to a world that's predictive.
Right.
Many of those methods are not in existence today. And I think that even when it came to just even this sort of diversity of data that we're now analyzing to really understand human health and animal health, we as humans haven't been smart enough to be able to sort of make sense of all these different data types and linking them and then doing and designing studies and doing the analysis to be able to really interpret what it means. I mean, honestly, people are still struggling with interpreting, genome data, right? As a standalone. But now we're saying we're linking that to phenotypic data and environmental data and all these other data sets, and we're trying to make sense of an individual's overall health. I don't think that, cognitively we have that capacity. So I think that the investment is going to be in the technology to do a lot of that work for us, right?
And to evaluate maybe 10,000 signals that affect my health, and then the AI can pull out the 6 that are really impactful. As opposed to a human wouldn't be able to do that.
A deep learning thing.
Right,
and I think that it's interesting because I think what the AI will allow us to do too, in combination with the real evidence, there are questions that we don't even know we can answer, right? I mean, because we're still asking the same questions we did before the technology.
Right.
We're just doing it much more efficiently now. Right. Yeah. And I think that with a lot of these sort of hypothesis generated questions and actually doing research unbeknownst to us and just producing responses, I think is a very real possibility.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, that's why I want to shift optimistic. There's a lot of fear around jobs in AI, but I really see the more glasses half full. There's going to be
I'm
a
actually
lot
an
of
optimist. I'm
opportunity.
actually an AI optimist. Hoping I didn't paint the picture. I was just giving the reality of leading a business and transforming a business to being much more AI centric. But I think, there's no question that, as someone who's been in this space for a long time and knowing the limitations that we've had and the things we weren't able to do, that I am a big advocate for AI, and that's what I'm doing now. So going around and talking to different organizations or people and really just sort of sharing my perspective on what I've seen evolve. This didn't happen overnight. I mean, we were experimenting with AI 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we started with natural language processing and we started doing some of those things. And then the whole deep learning, machine learning movement, it's not new.
Yeah. And they're all cumulative. Like the Human Genome Project sort of enabled the whole biotech industry.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Chris, I want to tag off of your note about what questions we're asking. We were talking at lunch about the difference between linear processing, which is what we're all pretty good at, and exponential processing, which quite frankly, we've had no experience doing as a species. My experience has been the closer I get to, I don't know if I'd call it the source, but those who are at the center of this kind of work, the more I come in contact with mental models that are wildly divergent from the timeline of reality that I feel like I'm in, and they're more like a movie, but they're also important because we're kind of living in a movie now. Right. And I've seen enough interviews with Larry Ellison to know some of the things he said and to hear your mission. To sort of bring this podcast to a close in the last 5 minutes, I'd like to maybe talk about some of those mental models and some of those questions that would have been absolutely out of bounds and ridiculous to talk about 10 years ago and now are absolutely on the table as like realities, right? Like that we can vision, we can see a path to, we can roadmap. And when we look at the continued progress of artificial intelligence and our ability to properly metabolize that and point it at a particular problem, like here's what might come out on the other side of that. So like what might be some things that are happening in senior level discussions at Oracle that are not classified, but are just like musings or visioning or, questions that the general public would be like, that's like out of a movie.
Well, I mean, I think philosophically, my question, and it's sort of rhetorical, is what do you use mental models for? I mean, usually people use it to sort of understand a particular problem and be able to break it down in a way that they can retain that information, right? Generally. So it's more for like human understanding. Well, in a world that is exponential, then I would say none of those mental models apply to this particular situation as we know it. So it's almost like we now have to create new mental models, but they may be applied differently. So I think that while we are still leveraging a world, right now we're trying to operate in a world of augmentation, right? We're still using the technology as sort of to say, it's going to make me, myself, more productive doing what I already do. I'm saying what I already do probably won't exist 5 years from now. So I need to reimagine my entire role and the value that I bring to the equation, which means that I now need new mental models to execute on that. Right? Where I see the greatest challenge or resistance is in people who are trying to apply their existing mental models and saying, how is the technology going to help me do what I do right now using my mental model? And I need to understand exactly how it works, right? And the reality is, if you've seen these interviews with the CEOs from OpenAI or Claude or whomever, they all say, we don't know how it's doing. And they built it, right? I think that we're going to have to come to some level of acceptance. It's almost like being comfortable with being uncomfortable, or being comfortable and not knowing fully how it works and operates behind the scenes. But we also got to learn ways of, I think where we start to get into what I get more concerned about is the lack of focus around governance, around ethics, around, sort of the management of biases or the data that we're using to train many of the models. I think it still comes down to some fundamental things, right? And I think that it's easy for people to get enamored with AI technology because it sounds really sexy, but the reality is, as a guy that's been around data mining, it still boils down to the data sources that are made available to it and that we're training the models on it. And if you train it with crap, you're going to get crap, right? And there's no other way around it. I remember when I first used ChatGPT in January of 2023.
Same.
And sort of arrogantly, I don't know if this is the same, I said, who is Chris Boone? I wanted to know about myself. And, that was the first prompt I ever did. That's prompt number one. And so it came back, and the first 2 lines were accurate. And then the 75% of it was wrong. And it was getting me confused with a bunch of other Chris Boones, I guess, that are out there. Go figure, right? But literally, I ran the same prompt 2 months later. And when I tell you 95% of it was accurate. So in that short span of time, I don't know how, I don't know, the data sources didn't change, it just got smarter, right? And so within that 8 weeks of time, we saw radical improvement with the reinforcement learning and the other things that are taking place behind the scenes. I only use that as an example to say that was now 3 years ago, right? And the technology is so much better, vastly better than where we are. So could I spend my time trying to develop my own mental models to understand how it worked and why it did it that way? Or should I sort of redirect my energies on other things that will be more productive?
Final question. Where will we be in healthcare a year from now? And you can take this any angle, right? You can take it, hey, the regulatory environment's not going to let us get very far, or the consumer is going to drive us. Like, what do you think is going to be the one thing in this historically slow-moving industry that we will say, wow, like we actually move things forward in this particular area?
So now let's build on that mental model question you asked. And the mental model that we would have used before is very linear. And we would have looked at it through one lens or one perspective. We would have looked at it through the eyes of the patient. We would have looked at it through the eyes of the policymakers, the regulators, caregivers, so on and so forth. I actually think there's such a level of multidimensionality to this problem, and it's multifactorial, that it's really difficult to say it will be this one thing, right? And this is someone who's looking at it. Like, even like for us, the reason that my organization is so interdisciplinary is because the problems that we face and we deal with are just like that, right? So we need people who understand public policy on a global scale. Each country is different. Everyone is different in their level of adoption or maturity when it comes to the frameworks they're using to regulate AI. In the freaking US, we can't even get states to agree on how to regulate AI, right? So imagine the complexities of just deploying it in the US, where every state is deploying their own AI and privacy framework. That creates complexity. Then we think of you sort of magnify or multiply that for us, and we're looking at it on a global scale in the same level of complexity. So I do think to say that regulation and public policy will not be one of the biggest sort of levers that has to be pulled, that would be a fallacy. I think the expectations and managing the expectations of many of the boards and C-suites around the world and the countries, it's amazing. You know, I think it's scary almost to see how they're executing on their AI agendas. You know, they went from we're not going to use it to we're going to use it and we need to cut 50% of our staff right now, but we don't know what we're using it for, to now, I'm being honest with you. I mean, to now it's like, where's my ROI? I've been spending hundreds of millions of dollars on this for the last 2 years and I'm not seeing it. And I was just talking to someone I won't mention, but I was chatting with someone before I came here, and they're having those discussions inside their company right now where they've invested, they haven't seen the ROI, so now they're reducing it down or deducing it down to specific use cases. Now it's like, that's the wrong approach, right? Because I do think it starts with a broader strategic vision, then you have a roadmap and you work against it. I think hopefully we start to think organizational leadership will have to evolve and change. And the people that are really sitting in the seats, and even when you think about like chief AI officers, I think that role is changing quite rapidly too. When we first started down this path, it was very tech-centric, tech bro, sitting in, they were being deployed to all these different industries, and they all failed for the most part. And they failed because they had no business acumen. They had no real knowledge of change leadership inside organizations. They had no real understanding of the problems they were looking to solve for. They thought it was all a tech problem, and it's not. So I think that role will continuously evolve. I think you'll probably we'll get to a point, honestly, where we'll see, dare I say, an AI model sitting at the boardroom in the board chair, a board seat on the board. I mean, I think that's a very real possibility, right? And so I think as we continue to see, so a year from now, what do I see happening? I do think we'll see fundamental progress, and I think that's going to be driven by customers and patients, because I can assure you probably 100% of people in this room use some AI model. Is that fair? Who doesn't use it?
One
person doesn't use it. And we're going to convert them before they leave. And so I think that level of penetration and that sort of market demand from the consumer is really what's going to drive the change.
Chris Boone, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.